Now, the next bullying that I remember was when I got in the 5th grade, you are allowed to take what's called the Common Entrance Exam in Jamaica. It's based on the British system. And what the Common Entrance Exam is, it determines whether or not you're going to go to secondary school, which essentially is a trade school, so you learn a trade, or you're going to go onward to what's called much more of an academic route, which is where you go to high school. And high school back then was the more prestigious choices to make. People, when their child went to high school, it was a big deal. And education in Jamaica was really held in high regard. And mothers and parents and families would pride themselves in the fact of how smart their kid was and which high school that they attended. And so when I took the Common Entrance Exam, I passed it and I attended KC, Kingston College, which is located in Kingston, Jamaica. And KC was what you considered an Ivy League high school in Jamaica. It was one of the few very top tier schools. It was famous for sports and academic. It had a nice mix. Some schools were famous because of their academics. Some of them were famous because of the sports. But KC was one of the few schools that were famous for both. And back then, when you go to KC, one of the things is that all across the school system, the government would give you khaki, the cloth. They'd give you a roll of it. And what you would do is they'd give it to you for free, but then you would go back home, and then you would hire a tailor to make your school uniform. And they were very specific about how they wanted you to design your school uniform. And what was interesting is, just off a tangent a little bit, one of the things that's interesting about it is, until I came to the United States, all of my clothes were tailor-made. And so it's and I remember the first time I went to a department store in Jamaica and I saw the clothes on the rack when my Aunt Barbara took me. And it was just a very strange thing. And I think I picked up a shirt or something on a hanger and I looked at it and it was just, I was thinking, why would anybody want to buy clothes that did not fit them? That was not made for them. I find it fascinating today that most of us get our clothes off the rack and very few people actually have tailor-made clothes and it's held in very high regards. But for some of my Indian clients and friends, when they go back to India, they also get their clothes tailor-made as well. So it's not as unusual, but I think it's sort of a fascinating sidebar. So when I went to KC, Kingston College, I attended in the, first time I failed the Common Entrance Exam in the 5th grade. And so if I passed, I'd go straight to high school. But I failed it the first time. I cried about it. I studied hard. And the second time, I actually passed. And so I had started going to KC in the 6th or 7th grade. I forgot if I think you finished the 6th grade and then I went on to the 7th grade for KC. And when I got there, things were great. So KC wore, everybody in Jamaica know what I'm talking about. KC wears a purple and white tie, and they have these epaulets, these purple epaulets that's on your shoulder on each side. Sort of like the way you see in those dictator movies, you got those epaulets. Okay, and your uniform was khaki, and you had to wear black shoes. I think it was black shoes at the time. But you had to be impeccably dressed. Your clothes had to be ironed, starched, and there was an inspection when you came in to school that they literally stopped and inspected you like the military to make sure that your clothes fit you really well and your your shirt is tucked into your pants. And if you came in disheveled, you can get sent to the principal's office, and that meant you're going to get caned. So corporal punishment was a big part of maintaining discipline and order. So you didn't want to get caned for that, and you had to make sure your hair was perfectly cut. Everything was manicured about you because KC had a very high standard. And so in the classroom, I remember one of the things also that carried over is that the teacher, beatings were less common, in high school, but you'd still get a beating up until the 9th grade. After the 9th grade, then the teachers would not beat you anymore. But so therefore, in the 7th, 8th, and I think up until the 9th, it might be, I can't remember if it's the 8th or 9th grade that they stopped caning you. But I remember being in the classroom and the teacher, you always had to study and make sure you're on top of things, because if not, you're going to get beaten. And so I remember there was a kid by the name of George Sanders. And George Sanders was somebody who bullied me. And the interest that we got in a fight all the time. He was a heavy-set kid. He was clearly overweight. And so he was much bigger than I was at the time. And it didn't matter how much I fought, I could never seem to win. So there's a difference, I think, in just being bullied and just sitting there and crying. That was not what was happening. I always tried. But no matter how I tried, this guy always got the upper hand. In fact, I remember once when I actually, we got into it, and then I hit him, and then I ran, and then he threw his bag, and his bag tied up my, what's the odds of a book bag getting you right around your ankles and tying up your legs? Well, the 1 in a million shot, he got me, and I fell to the ground, and then he laughed at me. And so, it was like a riddle that I couldn't solve. But then eventually, one day, I actually, we got into it, and I hauled off as hard as I could, and I punched him in the face. And then there was a slight pause. And then he started crying. And I was like in shock, because I didn't think this kid was capable of crying. And when he started crying, I started crying. And I started crying because I was just I was surprised that this kid had any sort of emotion like that. And then after that, something very funny that happened. We became friends. And even until I left Jamaica, we were friends. And what was interesting about that at the time was, even during that time, we were not really paying attention. George and I were not really paying attention in school. I think part of, for me, there was a little bit of a disconnect about being in school at the time. I cannot explain it, but I remember bringing home my report card at the end of the 7th grade, and I'd failed every single subject. And of course, there was a lot that was going on at home, in my living arrangements at home with Uncle Clive and the abuse, etc. I'm not sure, I don't know really how to explain it, but I lost interest in school. And interestingly enough, I always loved school, and when I was in school, I always did well in school. I always excelled. But this is the first time that I got horrible grades, and I had to actually repeat the grade. It was probably one of the most humiliating experiences I've ever had happen as a child. And to this day, I remember it. And so I remember George and I actually stayed back while everybody else moved on to the 8th grade. And because of that, we studied so hard. We studied so hard, and because of that, we actually got an award for most improved student, etc. And I left Jamaica before I could pick up the award, but that was sort of the outcome of that. So that's my story of bullying that I'd like to share with you. The moral of the story is sometimes, you really just need to avoid that situation at all costs. But also, to parents, sometimes your child getting into a fight, especially your boys, does not necessarily mean that you need to be involved in such a way of calling the lawyer, etc. Sometimes kids, especially boys, need to go through that time and go through that experience and learn how to deal with conflict and how to resolve conflicts and how to build relationship, and also learn about their vulnerabilities. And just like with George Saunders, it was a riddle to solve. And while I got lucky solving it, in real life, sometimes when you have a problem, that is a riddle to solve as well. And you have to learn how to solve it, as long as it doesn't involve the kid going home and getting daddy's gun and shooting someone, or me going home and getting a metal pipe and using, that kind of weaponry there. So you know, that's my takeaway. I guess I'm in no position to tell parents what to do. I'm not a psychologist, but I'm just going to tell you what my experiences are. Thank you so much for listening to my stories. Also, if you have a story of your own, I'd recommend that you write into me. Send me a video or write a letter telling me the story. Not your whole life story, I can't read it on the air, but if you send me maybe just a short letter or something I can read pretty quickly about something that has happened to you in your life that's interesting as well that you'd like to share, I'll read it to the audience. Thank you so much and enjoy your day.